It starts with this story. This is a good way, because there's so many thousands of facets to this. It's to give you the full magnitude is really hard. It takes years of research, and then it's like trying to describe an entire, what could be a 4-year course, in college to even get a grasp of. And I'm not tooting my horn. I'm mad at myself because it's so evil, it's so multifaceted, multivariate, just so incredibly corrupt that it's such a huge system. That's why they're in power. That's why they own the power companies and own the computer companies and set the world standards. They're the bosses. They own it. They control the issuance of currency, credit, liquidity. And they have us financing our own destruction. Now, I saw a United Nations report back in 2000. And the best article I saw, a synopsis of that report, was in one of the major Australian papers. And I made a big deal about it at the time. And the report said, the public now knows there's a move for world government. They are not going to like it. And because we know world government is so wonderful and so good and so needed, and even the article about it was like 10 pages long and glowing, we have to give them a choice. People like a choice. So we're going to give them a right-wing New World Order choice that will be George Bush. And we're going to give them kind of an America/England Anglo-American power axis. And then we're going to give them a liberal United Nations versions. And then that makes organizations strong to have this false bipolar. Just like it supposedly was, bipolar political world with the Soviet Union and the U.S. before. That was, to many degrees, staged as well. Because elites understand they need organizing principles. Generally, that's a military threat, or the threat of the invader, the threat of the empire across the river, the threat of the tribe down the road, the threat of the other hillbillies living on the hill across from you. That's what unifies people is war. And the Carnegie Endowment for Peace says they need war to help bring in a world government. They said that in the 20s. But again, that gets into their whole philosophy. And so they need organizing principles. So in the false left-right global paradigm, which are two arms on the same system, but people see those as two different choices and two different manifestations. Instead of saying, I don't want any world government. I don't want some bureaucrats in a distant land controlling me. I don't want a world government, because then if you get a dictator or an oligarchy over the world government, of course you will, it's been designed by them, they will then be able to abuse everyone, and no country will be able to stand against them or block them. That's why they want this centralization. They're still going to have sub-regions and have divide and conquer and play them off against each other. They're going to have divide and conquer, but also have their cake and eat it too, and have it all centralized. The globalists are centralized on a global web around us, and then we internally are played off against each other in neo-mercantilism. Look up that term. Look up mercantilism. I add the neo to it, because it's newer and more sophisticated. But it's along a 300-year-old French model of centralization. The French royalty, the Sun King line, had a renaissance, and suddenly there was a middle class, and the king and his extended family, the lords, and the bureaucracies that served them were losing control and losing their monopoly of industry and commerce, and fought. And so they came up with mercantilism as a system where the king still had to license you and certify you. Just like the local South by Southwest group with this huge music film festival uses the city enforcers to shut down anybody else having a party or a music venue or a film venue in the city. Only it's all selectively enforced. That's a microcosm example of that locally. Well, that's what mercantilism is. And it gets more complex, how they only allow raw finished materials to be produced in London, in Paris, in the imperial capitals, or in the surrounding areas in the homeland, the home country. Then the dominated, whether it's economic or military, normally a combination of the two, sub-districts, say they're growing sugar cane in Cuba for Spain, or they're growing sugar cane in Jamaica for England, or France in their holdings. Then they don't even allow the rum to be made there. They ship it back, have the rum made in England or in France, and then it's shipped back and sold to the colonists. And it gets more sophisticated than that. The colonists weren't allowed to manufacture in a factory setting firearms. So they did it in small one-man, two-person blacksmith shops. They weren't allowed to make a shovel or a rake or farm implements. You weren't allowed to make finished goods. They had taxes and regulations on that, and that's one of the big reasons that we had the Revolutionary War. You had to mine the metal out of the ground, you had to cut the trees, you had to finish part of the lumber, but you couldn't have value-added goods. You had to ship the raw material by ship back to England. And then they would come back with the value-added product, and that gave them incredible political control. Now, that's in a simple framework. There's a lot of other interlaced programs and control mechanisms, but there's too many resources. The elite is threatened by the middle class, the world middle class, world intelligentsia that's not under their control. They want a monopoly on new technologies. They need a global government to enforce that. Or they say, in the Royal Commission on Population and other memorandums, State Department Memorandum 200, that they will then lose their hegemonic power. We're already under a world government. They're just mopping up the last few rogue nations they don't control, like Serbia, Iraq, Iran, a few others. So we're down to the last, hour of a 10-hour risk game. And they've got 90+% of the board, and they're down to just a few little areas. But that's the hardest part, because now they've got to show everybody who they are. And so the globalists have been poisoning the earth, doing all these bad environmental things, causing all these problems. I'm not saying there aren't problems. They know that humans want to take care of their environment instinctively. The Rockefellers, the Carnegies, 110 years ago, openly founded as eugenicists. All the modern conservancies, all the modern environmental, that's mainline history, by the way. Go read who founded environmentalism and conservation. Knowing it sounded reasonable. Then they got government lands. They stole other lands. They can't just come with a gun and take your property. Well, the Rockefellers and the Pinkertons and others did do that. And they got a lot of trouble. They learned how to say, well, it's for the earth. Or we can't let those ranchers have that piece of property. They got dirt running off in the stream, hurting the town's water, and they'd go take it. See, they're very practiced at this. And so now they need to totally fund the world government, fund the world army with tens of trillions a year, and they're going to do that with sharing of taxes. The local governments are becoming federalized and through treaty internationalized. They're going to get a cut of the transponder in your car that taxes you on all roads. That's the official plan. They'll start it out with just a few cents a mile, saying it's for the earth, endless propaganda on every news channel, the NFL saying it's good, Sunday morning cartoons, the churches, the preachers. I mean, this is the full press. And so the left arm of this is going to be the environment. Every facet of your life micromanaged. Bureaucrats in your home weekly. Everything tracked to save the earth. But really, it's to freeze out competition, consolidate industry, and bring you into a feudal state so the government has to literally feed you so you have to follow their orders. This is bondage. We'll be right back.
It is a big idea. A new world order.
In the near future, Earth is done.
It is a big idea. A new world order.
In the near future, Earth is done. I explained to them how the oil companies are creating artificial scarcity. I explained to them how regulation is for the big corporations. I explained to them how it's a control mechanism. And you approach them like, see, everything, the mainstream media has Limbaugh and others come out and call them idiots and play chainsaws in the background laughing about cutting down redwood trees, which is just horrible to old growth we should conserve, but it shouldn't be fraudulent for the Rockefellers. And so the greenies hear that and then think, well, my gosh, I'm totally for anything they say. Global government, global taxes, it'll save the earth. We've got to do it. We've got to organize around it. But you explain to them that socialism was engineered by the British Empire to sell their populations back into slavery. And then people can't understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying that communism, as it was put forward, is something to make money. It isn't about making money. The elites issue the currency. They control the bank. They control the literal ether in which we swim.